It's the Late Show with Andre Walker and Asher Gould. And do you know something? I'm not surprised to hear that Gen Z say that they will not fight for the country because they believe it's racist. I wonder what element of racism it is, having to fight for uncontrolled immigration. I'd say that's pretty racist, but I imagine they're going to go another way. We're joined throughout the show by Dr. David Starkey, CBE, historian and broadcaster. And before I do anything else, David, I just want to ask you about this. I call him Richard Harmer, but his real name is Richard Hermer, who's the Attorney General. You know, this guy, Maurice Glassman, Lord Glassman, has said that he should be sacked because he doesn't believe in the rule of law. He believes in the rule of lawyers. Now, that can be quite hard for people to get their heads round, but you think that this is a sort of anti-democratic demagogue, don't you?
No, he's not a demagogue. He's the absolute opposite of a demagogue. Demagogues believe in the people. That's what demos, it comes from the people. He is the opposite. He believes in the rule of a tight, unelected elite, men like him, human rights lawyers, and what he believes is that power should be exercised absolutely irrespective of any ballot, any election, any act of parliament. And what we're seeing is the deliberate attempt at the subversion of any form of democratic control. And it goes along with something else, which is, again, the whole nature of human rights law, which is not commonly understood. You and I here, us, we constantly talk about two-tier, as though it's, a throwaway line. It's not. It is actually written into human rights. Just let me finish. It's so important. It is written into human rights law. The human rights law favours minorities over majorities and is anti-democratic, and therefore if you are, and the list is an interesting one, if you're a mental health patient, Kalokane, Ruda Kabana, if you're an oppressed minority, peasant Pakistani, Roma, you are privileged over the law-abiding majority. This is written, so this is not an accident. This is actually now part of our law.
And they've got the judges to back it up to interpret it in an even worse way.
The judges invented this.
So that was going to be my point, because you know what? You just said a second ago, we talk about it, but we don't fully understand it. I'm going to ask you a really simple question, and help me, because I know you're an educator by trade. What has happened? I just want you to answer that simple question. Where
there was a takeover.
With Tony Blair just on.
What has happened?
There is a deliberate takeover from 1997, which says the electorate is not to be trusted. It begins essentially with the European Union. Right. The European Union, the whole unity of Europe enterprise, beginning with the Coal and Steel Federation back in the 1950s, is a reflection of the fact that Hitler was supposed to be the result of a popular vote. And from that point onwards, the people are not to be trusted. And the EU begins deliberately as anti-democratic. There's a wonderful story told about the first press conference. It was so secret, the press didn't turn up. And they had to have a second press conference, which was to announce the Coal and Steel Federation, which is a complete fake, because the thing had been organised by the French Foreign Minister, by Schuman, who hadn't even told the French Prime Minister. I mean, it's that degree of secrecy, of a conspiracy of elites, of a determination to make sure that nothing is important is decided by the people.
And the people didn't understand how it worked, which means it's not democratic. And also, the Parliament... Von der Leyen was the only name on the ballot paper, Alex told me. So it's like Saddam Hussein.
Well, I mean...
At least he faked someone else.
No, von der Leyen, it was, again, is purely nominated.
She was the only one on the form to vote for.
It is purely... Well, there isn't really a vote.
No, not really.
These things are simply arranged within the elite. But the trouble is, we used to have a completely different way of doing it in Britain.
And when did it... Sorry. So you say 1997 it started. What happened in 1997?
They elected Tony Blair.
No, I get that.
He took the sovereignty away from the House of Commons.
What you do deliberately, you break up the whole... Do you remember Blair used to talk, that wonderful smooth voice, cool Britannia, we're a new country. We didn't believe him. He made it a new country. It's not so much Blair, it's actually Gordon Brown. It is perfectly deliberately conceived. You deliberately destroy our sense of nationhood with devolution. When you and I were young, you're not quite as ancient as I am, when you were very young and I was early middle-aged, we were still, the notion of being a member of Britain, or what, we didn't really talk about Britain very much. We talked about the United Kingdom and whatever, but it was essentially an oath of loyalty to the crown.
Yes.
And then what you do in the 1990s, you replace this with this spurious idea of Britishness, which consists of only two things. It consists of tolerance and diversity.
Yes.
So our very national identity just becomes a flag of convenience. And then everything you do, you shift power in two different directions. You shift it to elite specialist technical bodies, the Monetary Policy Committee of the Bank of England, English Nature, the Climate Change Committee. All important decisions are taken by these bodies. And the thing that's really interesting, have you not listened to what Starmer says? Starmer is contemptuous of politics. He's contemptuous of Parliament. He said Parliament is just a talking shop. He wants Davos. He wants the world.
The people he's contemptuous. Calls them far right.
Well, do you know, I want to tell you something, and there's almost no historical fact I could tell you that you wouldn't know already. But I think this one is interesting. In my class in 1995, studying A-level history, we were looking at something to do with France. I forget what it was. And the teacher said, in order to govern France, you have to govern the proletariat, bourgeois, and the bureaucracy. And silence in the classroom. I will tell you that a group of A-level history students in England in 1995 did not know what a bureaucracy was.
And you certainly couldn't have spelled it.
Didn't know.
Still can't.
That's right. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, what has happened is we had a thing we called a civil service.
Yeah, that's right.
And the whole idea of the civil service was, in theory, it did what ministers told it. Now, the famous Yes Minister tells the other story. But what's happened now, both of you, is quite deliberately the civil service has been put in a position that it actually swears to the crown and the rule of law, which enables it to resist what ministers want to do, because the rule of law...
with Priti Patel.
She's been complaining about it, because the rule of law incorporates human rights, which deliberately militate against the majority, and it incorporates international law, which deliberately denies the importance of the nation.
Is that why we now tend to find people saying whichever way you vote, nothing changes? I mean, I know there was Butskelism and all that in the past.
This is the new version. Butskelism was what happened after we're both revealing our semi-northern origins. Butskelism.
What's Butskelism? I never heard of it.
Butskelism.
What Butskelism?
Oh, you can tell I come north of the Trent. But it doesn't often slip out. But the Butskelism, there we're getting it right. Butskelism was the agreement on essentially socialist economics between the Tory party and Labour. All that went by the bourne under Thatcher. But what then happened was, with David Cameron and still worse Theresa May, the Conservative Party bought into the whole of that new Labour settlement that removed power to expert bodies and to lawyers with the Supreme Court.
Net zero by
and
law.
then net zero. And in fact,
but why did they do that?
Because
Is it easy?
I think it's partly easy. I think they actually believed it. Let me test you. Who is it who legislates net zero at 2050 by
it's
law?
It's a Quango, isn't it?
No.
Miliband.
No. Which Prime Minister is responsible for the legislation?
See, I watch the David Starkey YouTube channel, but I tell you,
Theresa May.
It's Theresa May.
Yeah.
Right. Who is
Hard
it?
to guess, though.
Who is it that's even more surprising, responsible for these terrible things, the non-crime hate incident, these things that are used to shut people up?
Cameron.
Who is it? No.
The College of Policing.
College of Policing was her.
Yeah, but it's Theresa May.
Right, yeah.
Who is responsible for beginning the case that's going on in Scotland at the moment with the ridiculous doctor, with his makeup and his penis pretending to be a woman?
You got makeup on it? No.
It is a disgusting creature. But that whole business of gender self-identification begins under Theresa May.
Why did Cameron reverse what Blair did? Why didn't he do that?
Because
he sort of
because they deliberately buy into it. The thing that's most shocking...
But we keep hearing, David, but this is too important for politics. Why is that wrong?
It's totally wrong, because the only way you can settle a big question is politically. I mean, let me give you an example. Right, I'm gay. The reason, on the whole...
He's just come out on air.
I know. Oh,
exclusive.
It is such old news. I first came out at LSE in October 1972.
So ahead of the game,
which is I've always been ahead of the game. You fool.
And that was in your Freddie Mercury days, wasn't
my
it?
Freddie Mercury was.
He was ahead of the game.
My Freddie Mercury was late 80s and 90s. I was very desirable. You should have seen me on a motorbike.
I worked with you in the mid 90s.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
But sorry. Go on. You were saying about being gay and whatever.
Why was it settled? Why is being gay a settled issue now? Because it's been decided by repeated parliamentary legislation.
It has.
If you look in America, the whole business of trying to decide abortion by a rigged verdict of the Supreme Court with Roe versus Wade has collapsed.
Yes.
In fact, judges cannot decide moral questions. And the whole problem is you're trying to use the law to do that. Yes. When you write this notion that the business of the law is to protect minorities, what you're saying is judges override the popular instinct. And they even, the most shocking thing is this recent case. Where,
the chicken nuggets.
No, the much more shocking one in which Gazans have been let in, people from Gaza, this
on the Ukraine
on the Ukraine ticket. And do you know what the judge, a notoriously odd and peculiar judge, I can't remember if it's his wife or his mother or something or another, leading refugee charity and that kind of thing. Do you know what he says? Is their human rights triumph any consideration of the public interest? In other words, you have a lawyer determining what the public interest is.
He's an activist, though. He should be disinterested.
In other words, but sorry, gentlemen, the only people who should be determining the public interest is the public through their elected representatives.
But what about this argument made by Sir Robert Buckland, who I like? I think he's a very good guy, actually. He says that there are many people, far more people in the legal profession than perhaps we realise, who are squealing because of this and feel that it's hugely damaging to the judicial process, simply because moving moral questions into the court means that the court suddenly is discredited when it wants to take genuine action.
And we're doing things we never used to do before. We've just talked in highly abusive terms about this judge.
Yes.
Suddenly the personality, the political affiliations, the family of judges are in question. But sorry, what happened was there was a coup within the legal profession. It was a particular group of lawyers.
Sherry Blair and Tony.
No, much more powerful people than that. It was essentially the senior law lord at the time, Tom Bingham, Lord Bingham, and he is responsible for the invention of, in 2006, you can date it precisely, and indeed I will now say it, I've just done a big article on this which will be coming out in the Critic magazine next weekend. There is a completely reinvention of English law, and the trouble is it captured. Professions can be captured.
Yes,
I'm an academic.
All our institutions have been captured.
That's right. But the law has been captured in a peculiarly extreme and dangerous way. And we've now got, there's something really frightening. We don't actually know what the law is anymore.
Yes. No. It's up to the judge to interpret it.
It's up to the judge. It's become completely
and they're activists.
They're activists. So. Or some of them are, some of them aren't. I mean, again,
but of course, it wouldn't matter whether you're an activist or not. If you don't agree with this, I don't agree with this, Asher doesn't agree with this. But if we were judges and we were forced to make moral decisions instead of ruling on the law, it wouldn't matter whether we're activists or not. We'd still build it up.
But there'll be more activists, because that's what happens in uni. You don't get in if you've got the wrong views, and actually, eventually, you end up with 100%.
Well, you see, there's something even worse. It has now been ruled that members of the bar, those are the people who will become judges, have to subscribe to DEI. They have to subscribe to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So you're signed up to this process. And again, it's a matter of ambition. This is where you get on. Look at Starmer. Look at Hermer. These this is where you make your name. This is where the fat cat rewards are.
Yeah, but we're seeing Trump now doing the other thing, and you know what I mean? It's going to affect it here.
The fashion has shifted.
But we're 4 years behind. What's going to happen?
Or we may never get there.
But I mean, we'll see what's happening in Trump. I mean, I think it was Deloitte Bank or something. In America, they've got rid of it, but here they haven't. If it's not them, I apologise. But some companies, if they're in the US, they're just, picking what fits their narrative.
No. I mean, in America, again, following the lead of the president, major company up for, starting.
It was when Facebook began. All the other corporates followed.
But the really big household names, Coca-Cola, Disney, the big Wall Street firms, BlackRock, they're all pulling back from DEI. But interestingly enough here, where there are those international firms, accountancy firms like Deloitte, Deloitte has pulled back in America, not here. In other words, we're at the thing that's frightening about Britain at the moment is we're now an island. Europe is swinging to the right, America is swinging to the right, Australia is about to, Canada is about to, and we're increasingly on a limb and run. For heaven's sake, our foreign relations are in that safe and steady hands of David Lammy.
The people want to follow the states, but this just shows we haven't got democracy. For years we've wanted to be like that, but we don't have an outlet in the old Tory party.
I mean, that worries me.
I think again, it is the awful problem that until the Conservative Party admits what it got wrong properly, in other words, says what the mistakes we made, we followed this terrible series of Labour policies, and we are as guilty as they are, and until we admit what's gone wrong, we will not establish any kind of foothold. But unfortunately, Badenoch is showing no sign of doing this at all.
Do you support something that I think should have been done in 2010, the Great Repeal Act, and just say we're just going to get rid of it? Well, okay, explain.
He wrote it.
No. I invented the idea that you have a Great Repeal Act, and that I coined this phrase a few months ago. We have a Great Repeal Act and a restoration.
Back to 97 laws.
Explain that in full.
Right. The idea would be that we had a revolution before in the 17th century, and there was a restoration, and all the legislation of the Commonwealth, of Cromwell and whatever, was repealed. What we've got to do, we cannot just... Everybody says, let's repeal the Human Rights Act. You can't do it piecemeal, because all this hangs together, and this idea of the rule of law, the Supreme Court, the Equalities Act, the incorporation of the European Convention, the various quangos, they all knit together.
Yes.
And you can't take them apart one by one, because you know what? It's like a monstrous octopus. You try and cut one tentacle
Tangled
off,
hair.
and all the rest of them come.
So we can pass an act to go back to 1997 laws and then add on.
That would. My view is that that's exactly what you need to do. It would have to be much more than just a single act of Parliament, because you would have to root out all of these decisions in common law. You would have to void. It's an enormous enterprise.
Couldn't you just go to 97 and then add the bits that you do?
Well,
like?
no. Hang on a second. I went to Law and Liberty, which is the Federalist Society UK division. And Martin Howe QC said one of the big problems is with legislation now, you've got to go back and look at, what was the reason for this piece of legislation coming in? Well, do we look at the debate in Parliament, which in many cases may not have happened, or the debate in the European Parliament? And he said the way of working this out of the system would take hundreds of years.
That's why you just go back to 97 and
well,
add
I think that what you need to, I think there are two things you need to do. The first is the absolute repeal of the legislation.
Yes.
But the second thing is you would need, and I believe, I am not a lawyer, but the people that I've consulted tell me this, you can actually void, in other words, declare null and void decisions of courts.
Yes.
And you would need to do that. It's an enormous enterprise. And it will take, but again, you see, look at what's happened, the difference between the first Trump term and the second Trump term, when he was president first and when he's president now. When he was president in the first term, it was chaos.
Yes.
Nothing got done.
Exactly
it was
right.
just a mess. This time round, one particular man...
His razor-sharp focusing nose.
It's not, it's partly him, but there have been a group of people, clearly...
He's got better people around him.
They're not better. They are the simplest fundamentally different order. That speech at the European Conference on AI by J.D. Vance is one of the great political speeches. You watch the confidence, the assurance, the force of that man, the eloquence, the precision of what he was saying. It was completely astonishing.
He's got all the best people around
But
him,
you've
hasn't
got
he?
an astonishing group of backroom boys. There's a man particularly called Stephen Miller, and he has been the one who has produced most of these executive orders. And I've actually, there's been this astonishing way in which you've turned legislation or executive orders into theatre. You know, he's been signing these publicly. He's been chucking the pens into the crowds or giving them to people. It's become a performing art.
He's a great showman.
He's a showman, but he's a showman with a purpose. This is like a Roman emperor. But the thing that struck me was a lot of these documents have actually been put online. They're astonishingly well written.
Yes.
And there's one that actually, which we should all
Well, I'll tell you what, why don't we leave it there at astonishingly well written? Let's go to a break and then let's just continue this conversation because, look, David's one of the most fascinating guys in the country today. Yes, it's the Late Show with Andre Walker and Asher Gould. And do you know what? We're just not going to waste any time because we've got Dr. David Starkey in the studio. And David, I know you wanted to talk a little bit about executive orders, but Perthshire Pete has tweeted me and said, could you ask David whether we should start a peaceful revolution? Basically, this idea of getting rid of the government by some sort of protest or whatever.
A national strike, everyone
No,
down
I mean,
tools.
I think, you see, I don't want... I'm that most boring of old fart things. I'm a conservative. I actually believe that the fact that we have avoided revolution uniquely in Europe since the 17th century is something that matters.
What about Chartism? Was a half revolution?
Oh, no, you see, that's interesting. Chartism there were these vast demonstrations in the 1830s. People, because there was a parliament then, there were elections then, but the electorate was very, very narrow. But Ash, the Chartists were not campaigning to bring things down. What the Chartists were campaigning for was to be part of the system. They were wanting the vote in exactly the same way that when the women rose, when the suffragettes, you know, the whole business of throwing yourself in front of racehorses and all sorts of things, they were not wanting to bring it down.
But we want the vote, really. We've lost our democracy. Our vote doesn't count, so it's similar in that way.
Yes, but they were wanting to be part of it. What I'm trying to say is, I don't think we want to tear it all down. There's an element of reform, there's an element of Matt Goodwin, there is Nigel on a bad day that talk in those terms. I think it's desperately dangerous. I think the fact that we have had we have the oldest political system in the world, and for most of its centuries it's served as really...
Just can I interrupt you? Because, look, I just want to clarify this, because people keep asking about this. One of your concerns is that if you, me, and a lot of other people got together one day, or got together tomorrow, and wrote the United Kingdom Constitution, it would almost certainly reflect what we were thinking in this moment, and that would be, in of itself, would not illustrate what the country wants.
No, I think generally speaking, we before 1997, we by and large worked.
Yes.
Remember, what we're talking about, constitution, it's got too many syllables. It's a big, grand word. But what we're saying is, effectively, everything is wrong. There are words that are impolite, which I shall not use even at this late hour, of what we've got. Everything is designed to stop things happening.
Yes.
And that leads to this terrible malaise. It leads to our economic malaise, our social, political immigration. They're all part of this same thing. We can manifestly see we took a disastrously wrong turn.
Yes.
And there are two ways you deal with it. There is the revolutionary route, and there is what I want, which is a restoration, which is deliberate going back. Because I actually believe that history isn't a straitjacket. You remember, this was Blair. Blair constantly talked about our history as a kind of straitjacket, as something fuddy-duddy. Wasn't it a shame, really, that we hadn't had a nice, fashionable revolution? Wouldn't it have been nice if we had a national day to celebrate cutting off, and he wasn't quite sure whether it was the head of King Charles I, II, or III in the future, cutting a king's head off, and whatever. You see, I don't think that sort of thing is a good idea.
No.
Look at France. France has never, ever established legitimacy.
No.
Since the revolution. You've had...
It's never settled as a country.
Never settled into anything. 5 republics, 2 empires, 2 monarchies. There's only a single successful revolution in the world, and that's the American. And the American Revolution changed as little as possible apart from the bonds with Great Britain.
Yes.
The American Constitution is a very lightly edited version of the British Constitution. The president is George III without his wig. When of course nowadays, bearing in mind the elaborate hairstyle of our current president,
yes.
maybe he's got a wig again. And again you kept common law. You kept the names of things. All the separate states had their own representative assemblies. You even keep the name of governor. For each state.
That's a good point.
So you which is astonishing. It's the title of a king's representative, but you just keep it. You keep the thing going, and that's why it works. And I think we want that sort of very light shift.
What happens with the people that are messaging in now who are critical of you for presumably remaining a Conservative Party member and not becoming a member of Reform?
I'm trying to explain why to everybody. I'm very Reform friendly. I'm advising everybody,
yes,
Conservative, Reform and whatever, on the Constitution. I sympathise with these people. Sorry, I deeply sympathise with anybody who's given up on the Conservative Party. I think that its performance in the last 14 years was a disgrace.
It's caused permanent damage, though, hasn't it?
It has caused permanent damage to the party and to the country. I think the failure of Badenoch to acknowledge this frankly and to break with that past, frankly, is a disaster.
She won't leave the ECHR, which is ridiculous.
Well, I mean, the problem is she's reluctant even to do that. And as I keep pointing out, you can't just pull out of the ECHR. This structure pulls you back in the whole of the time.
Well, it's binding on our law. We can take that out, can't we, of our law, and have our own human rights.
But the problem is it would make no difference, Ash, because there's a whole network of cases that would arrive at the same... Look, these judges, which are deciding that somebody can be kept in the country. I mean, the maddest decision. Well, we've
the chicken nuggets one.
Well, there's a chicken nuggets decision, but the maddest decision surely is somebody cannot be deported because they've joined a terrorist organisation.
Yeah,
that's deranged.
Well, no. Actually, remember, she has now been proved to have not been an actual terrorist. And so they're now, ironically, they're saying the Home Office was saying, let's deport her because we've proved she's not a terrorist.
But you see,
it's just
it's complete Alice in Wonderland. It's lunatic.
Can I ask you this?
Sorry, just one second. That is not in the European Convention. These are our judges putting a very elaborate and peculiarly English, because it's not even British, the law is English construction on these things, which is why, if you look at continental Europe, the French and the Italians have had much more success in getting rid of unwelcome immigrants than we've done.
Well, it's not binding on their law. They use EU law.
Well,
the ECHR isn't binding on that.
It is in precisely the same way, but they have not gold-plated into their law. That's the difference.
But isn't what do you say to me if I say?
No, sorry. Just again.
If I say that Kemi Badenoch is Ted Heath and Nigel Farage is Margaret Thatcher, what's your response to that?
No. The Ted Heath is, I'm afraid, Rishi Sunak. And she is no Margaret Thatcher.
No.
I mean that is the whole point. I mean the important thing. Look, let's get this right. The important thing about two things. The comparison is a really useful one of Heath and Thatcher. One of the reasons that Thatcher was able to represent a clean break was that Edward Heath was so rude to her. The fact that he threw this gigantic, decades-long sulk made absolutely clear that there was a break in Conservative Party history. But the other thing about Thatcher was intellectually intellectually confident. She had advisors like Keith Joseph who did exactly what we're talking about now. In 1975, Keith Joseph was celebrating the 50th anniversary of this. Keith Joseph said, I'd called myself a conservative. I'd been a member of a government that called itself conservative. It didn't do anything conservative, and I didn't do anything conservative. And you reconstruct conservatism. But what Thatcher does, and Keith Joseph do, they reconstruct conservatism simply as free market economics.
Yes.
And that's
Trump's very similar to Thatcher in that way. As a conviction, came in, did what he believed. And I haven't seen that before, apart from maybe with Thatcher.
I think the remarkable thing about Trump, again like Thatcher, you've actually got somebody confident enough to do something.
In their own beliefs, they believe what they're doing.
No, just to do something. We have not seen, I think, again, and his have been far more dramatic than Thatcher. You've suddenly seen somebody who understands power.
Yes.
Who has power, knows what to do with power, and has got a will and a personality that can carry it through. You see, this is why we were talking about young people, these strange people, that we don't really know anything about, that speak this funny language. Well, I was talking to a great... In it like.
That's out of date
A
now,
lot alike, and a lot of glottal stops. Yeah. Anyway, I was in Cambridge where there were a few of the glottal stops last night. But many young people, as well as saying we won't fight for our country, they've been saying they're deeply disenchanted with democracy, and they're saying they would prefer dictatorship.
Yes.
What I think they really mean is they want a government that's got the confidence to do something.
They want a Trump or a Thatcher.
But you just threw in an enormous hint there, didn't you? Or maybe you were being
I didn't notice it. What was it?
Much more explicit, where you said about Margaret Thatcher and boiling down everything to economics. That presumably implies that you believe that one of the big failures of the Conservative Party for 50 years is their failure to stand up for community.
I think to stand up for all sorts of other things, to stand up for the idea, to stand up for the idea of nationhood.
Yes.
To stand up for our history, to stand up for traditions, to stand up for, dare one say it, an identity which is recognisably British, or whatever that means. And all of those things. Again, you see that the whole behaviour of somebody like George Osborne has been effectively like a rather simple-minded accountant.
Yes.
If it sort of helps to balance the books, let's do it. Here he is now, chairman of the British Museum. Oh, well, why don't we just...
They're short-termists, aren't they?
Why don't we just get rid of... But they're the people who are literally, again, the Oscar Wilde remark, they know the price of everything and the value of nothing. Yeah. Conservatism has become merely another branch of that kind of easy wheeler dealing. The left is internationalist. The Conservative Party is free tradist, which means everything becomes lowest common denominator.
Could a new prime minister do what Trump just before? Well, we'll answer after the break. But could a prime minister, when they got in, do what Trump has
only
done?
if they do what I'm talking about?
But do they have the powers to do these executive?
Yes. Well, if you command a majority in the House of Commons, you can do pretty well anything. But what they would have to do is exactly what Starmer didn't. You would have to campaign honestly, and you'd have to win a large majority on an honest manifesto. If you have that,
like Trump,
the political system bends in front of you.
OK, we're going to continue with this straight after the break.
I answered that question.
This is The Late Show with Andre Walker and Asher Gould. Yeah, I'll tell you what, just building on from what you said, it is fair to say, though, isn't it, and maybe I'm wrong, that Margaret Thatcher in 79 was fairly, it wasn't the manifesto that we think of from Margaret Thatcher. It wasn't as radical as 83 or 87. And so is it possible at the next election for somebody to go as strongly into what you're talking about, a great repeal, as they might want to?
Remember...
Do you see what I'm getting at?
I do. But Thatcher was in a completely different position. She did not have a reform.
Right.
The whole rules of politics have changed with the success of reform. Reform now is doing better than any third party has done consistently since the Liberal Party was overtaken by the Labour Party.
Yes.
Now, that's only in the opinion polls. It's not yet translated itself into an actual election.
How will that manifest at the general election? Because they're going to have to merge or agree to not do the same seats, aren't they?
We don't yet know. I mean, there's no point in even trying to anticipate that. I mean, what happens will depend entirely on the actual political situation.
Although I have to say, I've seen some of the polling, and I've got, if you like, two homes. I've got where my family are from in Lee in Greater Manchester, and where I live now in Windsor. And it has to be said that Reform are massively ahead in Lee. And of course, are polling 2% or 6% or whatever it is in Windsor. There is a geographical split.
There is indeed, yeah, that's right.
Which people forget.
I mean, what is effectively what Reform is doing? It's taking over the old Red Wall.
Yes.
In other words, I gather if you looked at their seats in the last election, in other words, the July election, they came second in 89 Labour seats.
That's right.
It's a hugely high figure. Also added, slightly different, are the decaying seaside resorts, the Medway towns of the south, that sort of thing. Apparently Wales very strongly. But it's regional.
There's going to be a massive turnout, isn't there?
See, my instinct is, I think that there's an element of conservative collapse that's required as well. Because if you were to go to somewhere like, I mean, Leeds a bad example actually, but you go to a place like Wigan or Makerfield next door, and the Conservatives have literally never won those seats at all. Therefore, the Conservatives are considered a wasted vote. However, people do not believe that Reform has the glass ceiling the Conservatives have.
Well, so
effectively, that the alliance that Asher is talking about is being done by ordinary people on the ground.
Yes, I mean, it's an informal version of what Farage did in 2019.
Exactly.
And I think something like that is quite likely to happen. I mean, again, there was an informal understanding in the last election, which is why the Tories did so badly in the south, between Labour and the Liberals.
Yes.
That they effectively, it didn't actually stand down, but they pulled back on campaigning. And effectively, those who were opposed to the Tory party threw their votes towards, depending on the area,
whoever it was,
whether it be Labour or
but
even
if the
Green.
Tories and Reform would have done that at the last election, they would have had a majority. Apparently,
they would. But remember, on the whole, Ash, governments lose elections. Labour did not win the last election. Everybody and in my view, let me say this again to all those who've been criticising me, the Conservatives rightly lost the last election.
Yes.
And they lost it appropriately, and it was the right punishment for a disgraceful stretch in office.
But we all lost out because it was Labour, obviously, that were going to get in.
And we all lost out because I was one of the very few voices that predicted just how dreadful Starmer and the Labour Party
would be. You
and Peter
Hitchin.
That's right. And most people thought that, it was just, it would... Again, the problem is the model of the Uni-Party. Yes, in some ways it's a Uni-Party, but when you've got the Labour in, they actually believe fully in this rubbish, rather than the Tories just, on the whole, knocking along with it. And it produces something infinitely more poisonous, as we're seeing. I mean, I think the other thing that we should have been talking about is Theresa May and the Nasty Party. What we're discovering is just how utterly nasty the Labour Party is. Yes. All these revelations about the WhatsApp group, even somebody now a respectable member of the cabinet like West Streeting, his WhatsApps going back, admittedly, 10 or so years, are of a degree of violence had been made public during the riots would have sent him straight to jail.
Yes.
It's this extraordinary thing. If you have this belief in your own absolute virtue, as the left tends to do, it leads to the most astonishing level of sheer personal nastiness.
But I honestly believe that conservatism is about love for community, love for family, love for religion, whereas the left is about hate. But anyway, talking of love versus hate, we're going to go on a break now, but we're going to talk once again to a lady who's continually being harassed by the police for praying silently outside abortion clinics. More next. OK, this is The Late Show with Andre Walker and Asher Gould, and we've been joined by Dr. David Starkey throughout the show, but we're now going to talk to a lady who has been, she's been targeted again this week by the West Midlands Police for praying silently in her head next to an abortion centre. Isabel Spruce, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you, yes.
Explain what's happened.
So just over a week ago, I went outside the abortion centre, which I do every week, and just to silently pray there. Nobody going past would be aware of what I was doing from looking at me. And the police approached me, and whereas in the past they've actually taken issue with my prayers and I've had to go to court to resolve that situation, they now just say that me existing in that area is a problem, and they were telling me to leave.
They're basically thought police. They are, as the caption says.
Yeah, and the issue is that I've already, like I say, I was arrested, I went to court, I was rearrested. They were giving me various tickets telling me I'd be fined. In the end, I had to actually take legal action against the police, and I received compensation in an out-of-court settlement for £13,000, and I thought that was the end of it, and yet still they're coming out. Are you going to start legal action again with the help of the Freedom of Speech Union, or are you going to take again and win another 13? I am looking at all my legal options at the moment. I mean, it was never about me being out of pocket. I wasn't trying to get money out of it. I just want the officers to behave professionally, and the way they're behaving at the moment.
Isabel, why not stop doing it?
Well, to me, it's very important for my faith. I'm a Catholic, and so for 20 odd years, I go there and I pray. So as a Catholic, to me, something very important is to think about the passion of Christ, which is the suffering and death of Jesus. And for Catholics, it's actually, place is important. Now, I know for some people it might not matter at all where they pray, and of course God hears my prayers wherever I am, but place is important in as much as, Catholics will go on pilgrimage to somewhere where something happened thousands of years ago to pray there.
But a Catholic does not believe the soul of the unborn child is anywhere other than heaven, do they?
So to finish what I was explaining when I said about how I like to meditate on the passion of Jesus, I believe that abortion centres are like the modern day Calvary, if you like. I believe in a mystical way that is where Jesus suffers today at abortion centres. So I believe, because innocent children, as in very innocent preborn children, that's where their lives are ended. And sadly, obviously, a lot of women suffer at abortion centres too. I believe that is, in a mystical way, a modern-day Calvary.
Aren't they breaching your human rights, though, by doing this? Aren't they breaching your, freedom of expression, freedom to pray? Isn't it against the ECHR?
This isn't what the law is stating. What they're doing isn't what the CPS guidance states either. It's not even about freedom to speak. It's actually about just freedom to think what I want.
Can I put this to David, because this is this very American idea, and I don't know what you think the context is in terms of the United Kingdom, but we have not got people with megaphones screaming abuse at people outside abortion centres. We've got two things. We've got people praying, and we've got people handing out leaflets saying, we are willing to help you if you don't want to have an abortion. Personally, I'd have the people who are helping not have an abortion inside the abortion clinic, because I think that would be a more sensible way of doing it. But we are where we are. What on earth are we doing in a country like Britain where you have an exclusion zone where you can't even talk to somebody if the government says they don't like it?
Inform me now, I'm going to admit ignorance. There was a proposal, as it were, to protect abortion clinics from demonstrations. Has that been legislated?
Yeah, that went through.
Yeah, so Isabel, perhaps you can explain to everyone precisely what the problem is.
Can you explain? You are actually breaking the law, aren't you?
No.
Why have I misunderstood? In other words, tell me what the law is. But the law does provide that there should not be demonstrations outside abortion clinics.
She's silent and praying in her head.
Yeah, so there's two different laws at play. First of all, one is the local law, which is called a PSPO, a Public Space Protection Order, and that's around 5 abortion centres in England, and that would slightly vary depending on the area you go, and that would prevent certain types of protest and things happening outside abortion centres. And then we've also got the national buffer zone, or safe access zone, or whatever it's called, and that's outside every abortion centre in the country. And that also prevents certain things happening, but it doesn't prevent people from going into the area. People live inside.
Sorry,
these areas.
Can I just again? You're educating me, and I'm sure educating our listeners, which is what all this is about. Are these simply orders that are imposed by local authorities or by the police, or has there actually been legislation creating this stuff? Is there an act of parliament that specifies this?
So there's two different types of law. There is one of them is the PSPO, the Public Space Protection Order, which is a local law that's brought in just with the local council and the local police.
I understand.
Working together, and then there's
I think that's similar to shutting a street, effectively.
Yeah.
There's also the national law, which came in at the end of October last year. And that's something that's brought in by the government. It was
right. Now
in.
let's just talk about that, because this is the interesting thing. See, what I think is happening, Isabel, is this: we're seeing two completely different moralities clashing. You are a particular form of Catholic morality. But what you're doing is the abortion clinic, and it's this bizarre thing which we saw beginning in America. Abortion clinics have become kind of temples of the new morality.
Yes.
I mean, can you imagine reproduction rights, these things that women were clamouring for in America, is now the right to abort your child?
Yes.
We've had this extraordinary inversion of values. So we're seeing, in what you're doing, Isabel, we're seeing a clash of two completely different worlds. And the thing that's frightening is that the whole formal apparatus of our society, the police, the law, is on the side of what most of us would find. I mean, I don't know about you, abortion is probably necessary. But it's not something that wants to be sacralised. It's not something that wants to be held up.
That's what I don't understand, David. The way that people think, that my nieces would come up to me and say, "Uncle Andre, you must fight for the greatness of life so I can have an abortion."
Isn't it? That's right. It's deranged.
Yes.
But it is the problem that our new morality is an awfully frightening inversion of the old one. That the idea of love of country now becomes, well, you should really hate your country.
Yeah, it is all through the looking glass.
There's a real looking glass
derangement syndrome,
a kind of derangement.
I mean, is that the way it feels, Isabel? That suddenly everything in your country where you pay taxes has created a whole new morality, and you're on the wrong side of it.
I think there is certainly a lot of truth in what you're saying, and in fact, I think you're almost touching on the spiritual issue here, which I think is very much evident. I think abortion is a spiritual issue on one level, and I think there is certainly a spiritual battle going on here, which many people who are certainly Christians would recognise.
You would say it was diabolic, wouldn't you?
I would, yes, I would say it was diabolic.
You see, that's exactly.
I believe that humans.
No. You would. I mean, that's all we need to know. You think it's diabolic. The other side thinks.
The point is, my presence there isn't saying anything. I am just simply standing on a street corner, which many other people do. So outside the abortion centre, you will sometimes see people standing having a smoke before they go in. Sometimes they're standing there waiting for a taxi. Maybe it's a boyfriend waiting for his girlfriend. People just.
There's also this other, but Isabel, there's also this other element, David, which I've seen, and I saw under Tony Blair, and we were talking about 1997, the creation of the Supreme Court. We never seem to get beyond America's got one. The diminution of the Lord Chancellor. Well, the Americans don't have a Lord Chancellor. We must protect abortion clinics. Well, why? Because, if you think, Isabel is either a harmless nutter or a harmless Christian, but she's not. But
she's bearing witness, as she's describing it. I wasn't brought up Isabel, I wasn't brought up a Catholic, but I was brought up in some ways a much more extreme religious faith. I was brought up a Quaker.
Right.
I know all this language. I rejected it quite deliberately, but I know it, and as a professional historian of the Reformation period, I really got to understand it. You are bearing witness to an opposed set of values. Your mere presence there is a reproach to those people.
Right.
I mean, I think they know what they're doing. I think you know what you're doing. You are consciously setting your face against a new morality that you regard as an immorality. It's genuine. What's going on there is a genuine tragedy. I mean, the proper definition of tragedy is a clash of two moral systems, and there are two moral systems, and we've been listening to one of them.
Absolutely. Isabel, I'll give you the final sentence, but it will have to be a sentence.
Well, I just ask people to pray about this issue then, because I do believe it's a spiritual issue. And I don't say I'm going there to do a public witness, but as a private individual, I believe I've got a right to be on a public street. I'm a member of the public.
Okay, well, I have to say, Isabel Vaughan Spruce, my view is that you're doing absolutely no harm whatsoever. But I think I agree with David Starkey that that if you are people who are pushing forward for a new morality, if you are somebody who wants to tear down the traditional values of this country, then you will not like what she's doing.
Can you stay for 10 minutes for the press preview? We'll hold your chariot back for you. Yes.
Chariot indeed. Okay, this is Andre Walker and Asher Gould. 03444991000.
Dr. Dave as well. At Andre JP Walker.
At Virtual Ash. We'll be back in a moment with the press preview. Yes, this is the press preview with Andre Walker, Asher Gould and Dr. David Starkey. And I guess we're starting with the Daily Star.
Yeah, we have Chancellor's Pinocchio CV in full. Rachel from accounts. Turns out she wasn't even accounts. She was sort of the help desk, and they're not even very good at that for much help.
She was in complaints.
Complaints,
I think it's very appropriate.
It is, yeah.
I've got to say one thing though, in defence of Rachel Reeves.
What?
I would rather
Traitor.
Yeah.
I would rather have been in the complaints department, help desk at HBOS than been an economist at HBOS at just the time they were bilging the.
But that shows just how stupid she was, wasn't she? You know, from 52 to 2022, I was the Queen of England. This is apparently what she wrote. In 1966, she scored a hat. I scored a hat trick to help England win the World Cup.
I think this is called exaggeration.
In 2024, I'm learning my.
We know
anyway.
Ash is a bit dim, but
how dare you? But only compared to you. I mean, everyone is. Chancellor Rachel Reeves' online CV exaggerated how long she'd spent working at the Bank of England. Yeah, apparently she only did 5 and a bit years. And
so David, you were saying earlier, and in fact, actually, I'm going to steal this because I know that you mentioned this on another podcast or on your YouTube channel. And by the way, subscribe to David's YouTube channel. It really is superb. And I'm not just saying this. I know I always suck up to you, but it's because I genuinely like the things you say. But you made the point that she's plagiarised everything she's ever done, and her economic policy was plagiarised from the United States of America. And you were expressing concerns that you thought that they had to talk her up in order to make it sound like the Starmer government would have an economic policy
exactly right.
of some veracity.
The reason that this is not just casual lying. This is deliberate lying with a purpose. If you like, there was the famous. It's called, what is it? Smoked salmon charm offensive with the city last spring, in which they were trying to persuade the City of London that Labour was genuine and responsible. And she actually borrows from Janet Yellen, who had been first of all the chairman of the Federal Reserve, and then actually becomes the Secretary of the Treasury under the Biden administration, in other words, the American equivalent of the Chancellor of the Exchequer. Janet Yellen had done something which she called modern supply-side economics. And what that really amounted to was spending enormous amounts of money on public works, on education, on DEI, on transport, on green.
Yes.
And of course, it's really just old-fashioned public works. It's old-fashioned.
It's what Gordon Brown thought.
Well, no, we never did it. We never did it in quite that way. But it's really going back to the New Deal and whatever. Now, in America, it sort of worked, because you could do that in America, because America is a reserve currency, and they borrowed trillions of dollars.
Yes.
The reason that America has had the much higher inflation than we've done is the enormous borrowing of the Biden government. So what she proposed was a version of that that kind of Keynesian economics where you throw lots and lots of money at public works and green and all the rest of it. But of course, we haven't the money to do it. So it was always a fiction. And do you know what? It was Jason Cowley of the New Statesman who came up with a really brilliant formulation. He said she was just Bidenomics without the bucks. So in other words, Labour was elected on a completely false prospectus. And what we're doing at the moment, we're making hers just sound like a series of personal choices.
Yes.
And in fact, it was a deliberate campaign to deceive business.
Doesn't she realise she's failed, though, now?
Well, she must, but what I think we're just presenting it as a kind of she lied about her.
But
CV.
they double down when they fail. That's the thing.
But it's much bigger than that.
Well,
this was a deliberate deception of the electorate and a deliberate deception.
But
of business.
she has done one thing before we go on to the Daily Mail. She's changed, and forgive me for having to read my notes, but she's brought in per snuffle, which is that instead of looking at the public sector net debt, she wants the public sector net debt with financial liabilities included, which means that she's going to mortgage the student loan books and the pension fund.
What she's doing is, it's exactly like Gordon Brown. She's taking what are debts and pretending that they're assets.
Yes.
I mean, what we're doing is we are deliberately falsifying our public accounts in order to borrow even more money. It's rather like saying, because I've got a mortgage, do you know what? I've got a huge asset.
Yeah. And our interest rate is £100 billion a year, just the interest we're paying on the loan.
We are. I don't think it's quite as high as that, but we're spending as much. We're spending it in proportionately exactly what the Americans do. We spend like the Americans. Yeah. Our interest rate payments are the same as all the money we spend on defence.
Wow.
Right, the Daily... Oh, look, there's Mike Graham. Don't forget, put your top on, Mike. He'll be coming up after this in the morning, listening in the morning. Trump accused of appeasement over peace talks with Putin. Well, I think... To be honest, you can't win a war against a guy who's just going to throw. He just throws his men into the grinder, doesn't he? And it's oligarchs basically fighting over control. We have to end it.
I've got an unusual concern, David, which you may or may not share. I worry about the collapse of the Russian Federation and what the Chinese will do in terms of Manchuria, Vladivostok and that sort of area. Would there be an invasion by China of Russia? Is that completely mad?
Oh, I mean, if the Russian Federation disintegrated, they would certainly take over. I mean, remember, Russia in the 19th century, when China is at its weakest, seizes huge parts of northern mainland China. And I think
it's all switched, doesn't it?
That's right. And I think certainly if the Russian Federation disintegrated, at the moment the Chinese don't need to do it. Remember, what's happened, and again, this is something that just our press does not report. Because of the war in the Ukraine, the world is fragmented into separate blocks.
Yes.
So there is the old Sino-Soviet, the Russian-China bloc, but with, of course, North Korea, with Iran, increasingly with South Africa, increasingly with Brazil, with
India involved,
a very, very friendly India. Again, we're seeing the whole structures of international finance breaking up. You're now, again, it's a result of sanctions of Russia. People don't realise it. They have now created a new method of wiring money. They have their own structures of credit cards. They can make their own electronic payments.
But oil is in dollars, and that's the important thing. China want to switch that round, don't they?
Well, I don't think it really makes very much difference because there is an huge illicit trade in oil.
Yes, there is.
There's a gigantic illicit trade.
I thought when the Indian High Commissioner spoke at the Oxford Union and he said, look, when you put sanctions on Russian oil, what did you think we were going to do? Stop using oil completely?
No, they buy it cheap.
And he said, he said the reality is you've taken the supplies we used to have, and we've taken the supplies that you used to have. It's simple as that.
What should happen with Trump and Putin, Ukraine and Russia? Do you think Trump's right, or should they just continue with the war? It's not really appeasement,
well,
is it?
the problem is the war isn't really a war. It's a war of attrition.
Yes.
It's being fought with a different degree of determination on either side. The way it's going at the moment is Russia will inevitably just creep ahead.
Yes.
But they couldn't lose. I mean, we knew from the beginning Russia can just throw men and it's a nuclear power.
To begin with, it looked as though Russia was going to lose extremely badly.
But they're a nuclear power. How could they lose?
Well, because...
No, there were three stages, David. There was, if you like, the blitzkrieg failure.
There was total failure. Total failure.
Where actually, suddenly everybody went, oh my God, the Ukrainians might do something. That was probably day 4. I think then what happened was just the sheer weight of Russia pushing.
And do it exactly what it did under Stalin.
Exactly.
I mean, you had exactly the same thing in the First World War. You had the initial collapse of the Soviet front, the sweeping in, right up to Stalingrad. I mean,
including Kursk.
Right. Well, of course, the whole of the Ukraine was conquered. Was conquered by the Nazis, and then Stalin does exactly what was done against Napoleon, and the vast masses of the Russian population are just thrown.
But if Putin lost the war, he'd be dead himself, so he can't quit.
Of course. But again, we have not fought a real war.
No.
In other words, there's been a war of subsidies. There's been a war of sanctions. We have talked big and acted small.
Germany have still been buying gas off the enemy, paying for it.
But what I think is most shocking, I mean, we should all just pause here, is the extent to which we have abused Putin. We've talked about the need to arraign him before the International Criminal Court. And we would not survive half a day of warfare against Russia.
Yes.
The extent of our folly, of our arrogance, of our strutting as though we were still a great imperial power. And if we want to perform as an imperial power, we have to have serious troops. If not, you shut up.
I had a friend who was in the Navy, and he said it was not unusual for warships patrolling the British seaways to have one missile and nothing else.
Can't afford anymore.
Unbelievable.
Right, Daily Express. A man can change his name, grow his hair, wear a skirt like us on a Wednesday. It does not give him the right to use women's spaces or to force people to pretend he is a woman. That's from Maya Forstater, Sex Matter Chief Executive Rights. Things are turning, the tables are turning since Trump got in and he's banned DEI from everywhere. What's your view on this? Is it all going to start tumbling down here? It already seems to feel like it's at the beginning.
I think that we've seen the high watermark of all of this stuff. The tide is turning. The tide is beginning. The tide is beginning to turn. The extraordinary scenes in that dispute with the NHS in Scotland. Lunatic performance of the would-be woman doctor. But you see, it's the problem with the whole left. The left believes in the magic of words. Again, it was part of that conversation that I was having with Isabel. The left is essentially a religious movement.
Yes.
When you actually think about self-identification as a woman, it's a transsexualism is a kind of magic.
Yes.
It's saying, because I say I am a woman, I am a woman.
Well, words is correct. I mean, they say gender and sex are different. No, they're not. They're just the same, different words for the same thing.
It's playing with language.
They've decided it's no different.
It's playing with language. Yeah. But you see, religion does exactly the same thing. I hope Isabel isn't listening anymore. But the Catholic doctrine of transubstantiation, that by uttering hoc est corpus, the magic words over the elements of the mass, of the bread and the wine, you turn them into flesh and blood.
New speak.
Well, no, it's not. It's very old speak. But it's the left has a religious attitude. Again, this government's attitude to growth. They don't actually do anything to bring growth about. It's rain dance economics.
They've made science illegal in some ways, like the old church.
Is there an element with what's going on with the trans movement? is there an element of, and certainly the listeners to this show, many of them will say that there's been a deliberate attempt to smash the family and to smash the community because people in power believe that they can't build what they want to build as long as the family is strong.
I think that's going too far. And again, you see, one of the things where I think we've all got this wrong is all this talk about cultural Marxism and the march through institutions. I don't think it's quite that at all. I think that the thing that's peculiarly dangerous about Britain is the capture of the law.
Yes.
And this is peculiar to Britain. That the reason that we seem to be sticking in this longer than other people is because of what we were talking about in the first segment of the show. And again, if you look at what I was saying about Tom Bingham, this notion of prioritising minorities, who are the current fashionable minorities? The transsexual on the one hand and Palestinians and Gazans on the other.
Yes.
And they're allowed to do no wrong.
Australia and Canada probably have it as bad as us, or worse in many. And Ireland, maybe.
Ireland actually now probably has it even worse in some respects. And again, you see, the Irish case is a really interesting one. Why has Ireland gone in this direction? Well, partly because of the complete collapse of the Catholic Church, but it's also because, of course, Irish... And why, again, the Scot Nats? Let's talk about the Scot Nats, because it's really interesting. Why has all this gone so much madder under people like Sturgeon? Right. Let me explain. Because Scottish nationalism is really a peculiarly vicious racism. It's anti-English racism. Yeah. But what you want to do, you've got to pretend that it's not.
Yes.
You've got to pretend that it's modern, caring, civic nationalism and whatever. And the way you do that is by dressing it up with all of these ultra-fashionable causes. And the delight of Ireland, having done this, of course, is that they've suddenly, they kicked what was left of the British ascendancy out. And what have they saddled themselves with? I laugh my head off every day at the fate of Ireland. If there's any group of people who deserve it, it's that lot.
Well, I will say, you old softy. That is Dr. David Starkey, and this is the press preview. David's going to leave us now, but we will be back in just a moment.